it's almost like is it like gambling where the dopamine hit occurs in the moment before you know whether or not you've actually won? Is there some sort of deep longing that's actually about a desire for community and being known that drives people to the prosperity gospel and is maybe in this way sort of driving them even toward the concept of Passover, even if they don't understand that community aspect? Joining me is Carmen Imes, professor of Old Testament at Biola University. And I am excited to talk about this topic because I really enjoy learning more about the Old Testament and its relevance to us as Christians today. We're going to be talking about Passover. Now, Passover comes around every year. It's not exactly what you'd call headline news, perhaps, unless, of course, you discover that supernatural blessing is headed your way this Passover, which is exactly what viewers of televangelist Paula White's ministry learned this past week. White, if you'll remember, is president of the National Faith Advisory Board and the leader of the White House Faith Office. Last Sunday, White posted a video on her Paula White Ministries website that outlined 7 supernatural blessings that could be released by those viewers who were generous givers to her ministry. If you gave, you could receive an angel assigned to you, an enemy to your enemies, good health, prosperity and wealth, a long life, and a special year of blessing. Now, while Snopes, the online fact checker, did acknowledge that there was no specific request for a donation amount, a viewer could infer that giving, say, $1,000 could presumably get you all of what you were hoping for this Lenten season, including a Waterford crystal 10-inch cross sent to you by White's ministry. So much to break down here, Carmen, and I'm so excited to talk to you about it. These blessings, they sort of fall into a couple of buckets, right? Protection, health, and wealth. And while there's clearly a lot to unpack here, I want to begin with what the real longing is that the prosperity gospel appeals to, because even if I wouldn't give $1,000 to a televangelist, I suspect this story is still for me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this touches on a deep-seated desire in all of us to have a happy and fulfilled and successful life. We want things to work out well for us. And here comes a prominent Christian leader who's been to the White House, who, is on all of these big stages, who is saying, look, when I read the Bible, I see it saying this is available to you. And so there's this sense of like, oh, all of the things that are plaguing me could be gone. I could be guaranteed to stop having the kinds of challenges that I've been facing. And so, of course, this is appealing.
Yeah. Well, you spend your days knee deep in the Old Testament. Where did Paula White locate these blessings in the Bible? And do Christians belong even observing Passover in the first place?
Yeah, so I teach the whole Old Testament, but I spend most of my days in Exodus, and that is where she located these blessings, which is how I got involved in this whole thing. She connects these blessings to Exodus chapter 23, or draws them from Exodus chapter 23, which is a really interesting place to land. The book of Exodus is the epic story of God's deliverance of Israel from Egypt. The Passover is the night when they paint the lamb's blood on their doorpost so that the angel of death will pass by and they will be spared from the plague or the sign that God is bringing against Egypt. So it's a really important part of Jewish history, an important celebration, remembering that every year families are remembering what God did on behalf of his people to set them free from oppression. So it's a very important cornerstone to biblical faith. The second half of the book of Exodus takes place at Mount Sinai, where God is drawing his people into covenant with himself and telling them, here's how I want you to live because I've appointed you to be my representatives among the nations. And because you are my people and you're going to represent me, here is how I want your society to function and to be ordered. So between chapters 20 and 23 are all of the laws that are to characterize this fledgling nation. And at the end of chapter 23 is a section that is far less transferable than anything else in this section of laws. So the laws are meant to continue to be sources of reflection for believers. And I would argue that as followers of Jesus, we are grafted into this same covenant, and the laws are relevant to us. We should be reading them. We should be reflecting on, how can I represent God in my generation? How can I order my life so that his name is honored? So I do think there's relevance in these chapters. But the second half of chapter 23 is the specific instructions, not timeless and universal, but specific for this generation at Sinai. As they make their way from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land, God says, see, I'm sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and bring you to the place I have prepared. This is specifically about how to get to the Promised Land, not a blanket promise for anyone who celebrates the Passover could have their own personal angel. This is one of the things I noticed about Paula White's video on the Passover is she's kind of reconceiving of the blessings of chapter 23 in a very hyper-individualistic way. You personally can have a long life. You personally can have increase. You personally can have an angel to assist you. And it kind of just plays into this idea of the American dream and kind of self-actualization or self-fulfillment, rather than the community of faith gathered together around the presence of God is going to experience his blessing.
How might an ancient Israelite respond to those claims? Because they didn't really even have a conception of individualism like we do, did they?
No. It's not that they didn't think of themselves as individual people at all, but their whole value system was built on the community. So the promises were for everybody. The consequences were for everybody. If my neighbor sins, I'm at risk of God's judgment because my neighbor's putting the whole community at risk. So this is not something that they would have personally held on to as, okay, now I personally am good. Like the rest of you do what you like, but I'm choosing this. That's not how it worked for them.
Is the prosperity gospel particularly at odds with even the concept of Passover?
Oh, yeah, interesting. So that's an interesting question. I do think that Passover is all about knitting a community together. And Paula White, as she looks at this passage, pulls out some things. For example, she promises prosperity. One of the 7 supernatural blessings that she says will be unlocked is prosperity. And she attaches that to verse 25 of Exodus 23, which says, worship Yahweh your God, and his blessing will be on your food and water. And I want to say, anyone who's been only on food and water, actually in Hebrew it's bread and water is and bread can be used. Yeah, it's a meager diet. Bread can be used as a shorthand way of talking about any food that you might eat. But I think what's striking to me is that we have mentioned here just only the very basics, that God will bless the basics. And indeed, he provides bread and water in the wilderness. He provides manna and water. He does not provide steak dinners with asparagus and fine wine. He's not ushering them into an elite lifestyle. He's giving them bread for each day. Their daily bread is what he provides. And so this idea that God's deliverance is going to result in some kind of elitism is that's the vibe you get from her video and from her website, that God is going to pour out increase and all of that. And I don't see it in Exodus.
I think it's particularly interesting that Paula White's ministry in this way, in this particular instance, it's mediated by a video. It's an online experience. When I'm hearing you talk about Passover, and it's so very much about embodiment and community. And I wonder to what extent the loneliness epidemic of most Americans really drives people to keep coming back to a prosperity gospel. It's almost is it like gambling, where the dopamine hit occurs in the moment before you know whether or not you've actually won? Is there some sort of deep longing that's actually about a desire for community and being known that drives people to the prosperity gospel and is maybe in this way sort of driving them even toward the concept of Passover, even if they don't understand that community aspect as you're describing?
Yeah, I tend to think that the church in the West, the church in the U.S., and particularly the white church in the U.S., has pandered to this idea of self-fulfillment so that we're not even offering community in the ways that we ought to. I'm convinced that the scriptures hold out community as the ideal, that God is calling us together, and this is why it still matters to be part of a church and to be plugged in even when churches aren't perfect. And even after Me Too and Church Too, and all of the celebrity pastor scandals that we've seen in the headlines, why I think we should still consider the church to be God's plan A and something that we plug into, because we weren't made to do this alone. But somehow along the way, I think Western Christians have lost sight of this, and we have kind of crowned the individual. And I think that's why we have an epidemic of loneliness, because we've been taught to value independence and again, self-fulfillment or self-actualization. Like, I need to figure out my path and my finances and my health, and we're not actually connected to each other in the ways that we're designed to be. And so then that results in an epidemic of loneliness. People maybe don't go to church because they don't feel connected when they go. It feels kind of pointless. And if I'm just going to sit individually and hear a message, I could do that at home in my pajamas and watch a televangelist. So enter Paula White. What I see from her, and I'm not some expert on her, this video crossed my feed and caught my attention because she was talking about Exodus, and that's my jam. But I remember being part of the charismatic movement back in the early 90s, and I remember hearing some of these same promises, like that. I feel like this is nothing new in the charismatic movement. What she is promising has gone around and around and around. So I was looking through her website, and there's a picture of her praying over all of these little vials of anointing oil. She's praying over them, and then they're going to go to people's homes, the homes of donors, and then those people are going to have access to this healing power. I remember Marilyn Hickey Ministries back in the early 90s, and she, if you gave a donation to her ministry and sent in your prayer request, she would pray 3 times over a prayer cloth, and you could put it under your pillow, and it would unlock healing. So what Paula White is offering is nothing new. This is a classic televangelist move to try to connect viewers in with the ministry and make them feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves.
Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.